السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. الحمد لله. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وأفضل الصلاة والتسليم على سيد المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه والتابعين لهم بإحسان هدى إلى يوم الدين. اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل واجعلنا من خيرة أمة سيدنا محمد صلى الله تعالى عليه وسلم. Now, in order to understand something about making the most of the month of Ramadan, we have to understand a few fundamental realities, right? The Prophet ﷺ in a famous hadith told us that مَنْ يُرِدِ اللَّهُ بِهِ خَيْرًا يُفَقِّهْهُ فِي الدِّينِ. مَنْ يُرِدِ اللَّهُ بِهِ خَيْرًا يُفَقِّهْهُ فِي الدِّينِ. Whomever Allah wishes well for, He grants whomever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wishes well for, He grants deep knowledge in religion. Now, what does fiqh here mean? The hadith literally says, whomever Allah wishes well for, He grants fiqh in religion. What does fiqh here mean? Anyone? What does fiqh here mean in this hadith? Whomever Allah wishes well for, He grants fiqh in religion. Knowledge, yes, that's one aspect of it. But it's more than just knowledge. It's understanding. But what does understanding mean in this context? Anyone on the sister side? Embodiment. That's a consequence of it. Because if you know something and you truly understand it, you embody. If something, you only understand that fire burns if you keep your hands out of it, right? But what does fiqh mean? Yeah, understanding and practice, that the idea of embodiment being realized by it. Fiqh is to understand something deeply. Okay? Fiqh is to understand something deeply, right? So you have knowledge of something, and then the depth of knowledge of something is called fiqh. Okay? It's such that you have encompassed the realization of what something really is, right? So now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam told us that whomever Allah wishes well for, He grants fiqh in religion. He grants deep understanding of matters of religion. Now, in order to have deep understanding, there are certain preconditions, right? One of which would be that someone, in order to have a deep understanding of something, have a deep understanding of something, you have to have deep reflection, right? I mean, if you just imagine from our daily life context, right? What's the difference between someone who just knows a little about the NFL and your friend who's a complete nerd, right? He knows every little stat and so on, right? That he or she probably spends a lot of time thinking about the NFL, right? And so on, right? It's like on Sunni path one side, there's a question related to sports lotteries or something. Fantasy leagues, right? So I assigned it to one of our female teachers, and the answer came out wonderful. It's so detailed, right? Now I know Sister Shazia is a friend of my sister's. My wife was one of her first teachers. She's a friend of my wife's, and so on. And I know her husband well. So how did Shazia come up with such a detailed answer on fantasy? These fantasy leagues. And I thought about it. It wasn't her. Her husband sometimes answers questions on her behalf, right? Or at least gives her the But she may know something about fantasy leagues, maybe because her husband is a big Buffalo Bills fan. But the difference between Sister Shazia, who knows something about football, right? Because she lives in the same house as her husband, and her husband, Zahir, spends a lot of time thinking about it, right? Now the same thing, one of the key characteristics of a believer is that they think a lot about matters of their deen, because deen matters to them in their life, right? So similarly, in order to make the most of Ramadan, to make the most of deen, you have to be people of reflection. You have to consider not just what we're doing, but you have to go beyond that. You have to think, why are we doing what we're doing, right? And what's the purpose behind it? You have to ask these key questions. What am I doing? Why am I doing it? How can I make the most of it? And if we address these questions, then our actions will be meaningful. This is something we touched upon during the khutbah yesterday as well. But in order to understand how to make the most of the month of Ramadan, we have to reflect a little. The first point of reflection is, what is the purpose? What is the purpose of life itself? And I know it's like kind of early for a weekend in Ramadan, but I'm going to start with this question. What is the very purpose of life itself? If you could summarize it in one word. I don't want like an answer, I want a word. No. One word. The purpose of life is worship. Yes, worship. Okay? So that's like a big answer, right? Would the sisters disagree? Like, any alternative answers? And there are alternative answers. And it's not partying, right? It's something related to worship, but it's more general.
Serve Allah.
Serve Allah, 2 words. Anyone? Okay, so submission. Okay, yeah. This is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us these things, right? One of the reasons to read the Quran is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that it's tafsirun li kulli shay, right? That the Quran is a detailing of absolutely everything. It's a detailing of absolutely everything. Now, it doesn't tell you whether Notre Dame will win or not, right? It details all that is significant in life, right? I don't follow it. I've just been talking to my friends too long, right? And they're like crazy. Now, it details everything. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself has told us the purpose of life is what? Is to serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is to be in a state of ibadah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And ibadah is what? It's service of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Our worship is one aspect of our service to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Because what is ibadah? In the Arabic language, ibadah is absolute submission to another. Ibadah is absolutely abasing yourself and submitting yourself to someone. Right? And that's why the ibadah could only be of God, and in our sound understanding, it can only be of God Himself, capital G, of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Absolutely submitting oneself and abasing oneself. And our acts of worship are one expression of that. Our acts of worship, our prayer, our fasting, our zakat, our hajj, our recitation of the Quran, etc., they're one expression of that submitting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But then, if we try to have fiqh in religion, why do we submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And we should always ask ourselves this question, right? Why? Why do we submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Besides the fact that He's commanded us. Because He created us. So, and that is good, right? He created us. But how does that follow? You're spot on, right? But how does that follow? the alternatives are unpalatable. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the center of all value. Yeah, you have to explain that, right?
It only makes sense in the context of the actions. It makes sense in the context of getting closer or farther from Allah.
His actions only make sense in the context of whether they make closer or further from Allah. So ultimately, so how does that relate to our submitting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala?
Because without that, there's no actual sound meaning to your life at all.
Because without that, there's no sound meaning to your life. So you're telling me that my eating Haagen-Dazs ice cream has no meaning?
Unless it's relevant to Allah, I don't think it has any sound
I
meaning.
mean, for me, let's say right now, if I'm eating this ice cream, it has a lot of meaning, it has a lot of taste.
But why do you like to taste it?
It has a lot of consequences. When I weigh myself after that half liter of ice cream, I notice many things have changed. And if you're getting old in years, you notice the effect of heartbeat and stuff too, blood pressure. So that's a lot of impact. To please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why would you want to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? No, I'm not being contrary, right? I mean, your answers are all right, but we should think about these things, right? When Allah tells us that we should reflect on the Quran, right? We should think these things, that when Allah is calling us to do something, or warning us about something, or encouraging us to do something, or telling us about past people, we should always ask ourselves these questions. What is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling me? Why? Or why is this being mentioned? Right? And yes, we know that the purpose of life is to submit to Allah, to worship Allah. But we have to ask ourselves this question, right? Why? What is the purpose? What is the consequence? What is the need? What is the benefit? Right? And we should have these questions clear. Now to understand these questions, it's my cue. We should begin with first things, right? How do we understand who Allah is? How do you define Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Anyone? How do you define Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Who is Allah? Okay, as He is defined Himself in the Quran. That's a very good way. How has He defined Himself in the Quran? Okay, as Al-Khaliq and the other attributes that He's given Himself in the Quran. Very good. How else would we define it? A more specific definition. That's a very broad definition, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has described Himself with so many things in the Quran, right? But if you wanted to say, or what is our understanding of God, right? What is our understanding of God? Right? We have to think at, I went to university at University of Toronto, right? And we used to have these things at our MSA called dawah tables, right? So once a week they used to put out a table somewhere, and it was more like an MSA table. We used to just go, it was like in 2 hours for brothers to chill out, 2 hours for sisters to chill out. And they used to be the transition period where God knows what we right? But one day there's this Egyptian graduate student. He just come to Canada, right? And very interesting because early October, fall just started, and he's wearing a big jacket and a hood, and really shivering. And I told him, winter's not started yet. But anyway, he spoke English with a very heavy accent and so on, but he was really enthusiastic and he wanted to sit at the dawah table, which I could go with. And one day he was sitting at the table and this atheist came by. Now the atheist came to my friend and said, I don't believe in God. So our Egyptian graduate student looked up to him and said, I don't believe in the God that you don't believe in. But I believe in a God that you do not know about. So the atheist is like, excuse me? Right? And this is a good thing. Like, if you want someone to listen, you have to catch their attention, right? So it's good marketing. He said, I don't believe in the God that you don't believe in, but I believe in a God that you do not know about. And this is really profound, right? That I believe in a God, that I don't believe in the God that you don't believe in. I don't believe in the God that you don't believe in, but I do believe in a God that you have no knowledge of, right? And this is why it's important to understand, like, when we say we believe in God, what does that mean, right? Because if you look at it, if you take what the ulama of Aqidah have told us, right, and you make a model of, if any of you study economics, right, or probably any of the sciences, but I don't know much. No one knows anything about science. Grade 11 was the last year in biology, grade 10. And the last day of class, I took my biology notebook. It was just one notebook, didn't take any notes. And the teacher went out, I ripped up my notebook, threw it in the air, and said, it's all over. But then one of the girls, right at the front, turned around and said, Faraz, we have exams in 2 weeks. So I was ecstatic. Finally, we're over with all this nonsense. But it worked out well, because I just took her notes, right? And her notes actually were really good. She's one of those teachers who like took notes and rewrote the notes and then rewrote the notes. And, I'm with that. But if you make a model in which you put what the mainstream society's understanding of God is, right? So you have belief in God and you have believers. Okay? And you see what happens to people's belief. And we define the believers as being rational, okay? That they reason. The understanding of God that is prevalent in the society we live in entails that believers, if they think, they would go from belief to disbelief. Why? Because this understanding of God is not a sustainable understanding. It may be emotionally sustainable, right? It may be sustainable at the level of society, like have a social dimension to it, but at the level of reason, it does not make sense. A God, as defined in Christian understanding, for example, simply cannot exist. It is a logical absurdity that God had these characteristics. This is why, as a believer, we don't enter into polemics with other people, right? The sunnah of da'wah is what? Is not to argue with people, but rather to call them to the good, right? If you argue with someone, what happens? They become defensive about what they believe in, right? And you don't do that. If you go to your friend and say, and tell them that you attack something they hold dear, they're going to defend. But if you discuss and you express respect, then they'll be willing to listen, right? And examples of that are clear in the Quran. But it's important to understand what is the Islamic understanding of God, right? What is the Islamic understanding of God? How in Islam do we define God? Anyone? Okay, yeah. Well, what? Okay, so the Ilah, God, is the one worthy of worship. Okay? And this is actually the understanding of the Arabs of the Ilah, right? That al-Ilah huwa al-ma'bud. Okay?